Hello everyone. Last night we showed in class how to create the illusion of droplets of rain falling in front of a window. There are several things to take into consideration when we're trying to create this effect. The main one of which is how to sell it to the viewer. If you do a quick search on Google for images that reflect what we saw last night, you will find things that look like this. So you'll find that there's droplets of water in front of a glass. But what really sells the effect is the fact that the background is out of focus. So it showcases to you that the foreground is where the droplets are, and that is sharp. And then the background is blurry. And also notice that the droplets tend to have kind of a fractal outline to them. They're kind of displaced. They look not evenly circular. So those are three things that we need to take into account when we're doing pre-production. So what I've done is I have found an image online, and I am going to use that image to create a composition. This composition is 1280 by 720, and this image of a rainy evening is what we're going to use as the background. To pull the effect, what we're going to do is, as you saw, I just created a composition. And with that same image, I am going to create a duplicate. It is this duplicate that we're going to use to create the illusion of the droplets. Before we do any of this, I would like to have also rain falling on the scene. So to do that, I am going to create a solid. And I'm going to use the shortcut Apple Y or Control Y to create a solid. And this one, I am going to call it rain droplets. I'm going to make it the same as the comp size, and then I'm going to click OK. Now this is where I'm going to apply the effect that is going to have the rain falling down on the scene. For that effect, we're going to go to our Effects and Presets window, and I'm going to do a search for a filter with the name Particles in it. And the one that I'm choosing from what I found is CC Particle Whirl. I'm going to drop that effect by dragging it onto the solid. And you'll notice that if I scrub my video, I get these things that look like sparks of fire, like a firework, coming out of the center from the producer area, that little circle in the center. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to change the settings on this effect so that I can make these sparks kind of look like water. To do that, the first thing I want to do is I want to turn off that grid. As you know, I don't like working with the grid on. And I do that by going into my grid and guides area and opening up the drop down. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the actual particle that I'm using. So I'm going to the particle drop down, and instead of using a line from the drop down on particle type, I am going to use shaded sphere or faded sphere. Either one of those two is going to do the job. So for now, let's go ahead and pick shaded sphere. You'll notice that it gives me this bubble looking thing, like a circle, like a bunch of spheres floating in midair. And I'm going to change its birth color to white and its death color to white. Now these are gigantic, so raindrops do not look that big. First. Second, even if I move, they look more like popcorn popping out. So several things we need to change on this particular particle. What we're going to do is I'm going to choose a different one just to see if it gives me a better option. This kind of looks like snow. But if I am looking at rain in real time, you'll notice that you can never catch the view of a droplet falling through the air. You actually see a blur of droplets falling through the air. So once this is falling at full speed, that's what we should catch. We should catch this wisps of what looks like a trail, almost like a line, falling from the sky. So let me go ahead and either one, the shaded or the faded sphere, will work for this. I'm going to use the faded sphere just for now to see if I get the results I want. Then I want to change the size variation on this. I want to make it, actually I want to keep it at 50%, but what I want to do is I want to make those particles a little smaller. Right now they're at 0.25 for birth and death. I'm going to change that to about half the size of that. So it will be 0.125 for the birth and then 0.125 for the death. That'll make my particles smaller. And they still look a little bit like popcorn, but that's because we're looking at where they are being born, in the middle of the screen. So I need to change where the producer is, shooting those particles from, which is that circle in the middle of the screen. I'm going to change that producer to be above the image, ideally above the actual composition, and then have the particles fall into the screen as if they were droplets of water. So to do that, I am going to collapse my particle drop down, and I'm going to go to the producer drop down. And I am going to increase the radius of my X radius to about 2.5. And then I am going to do the same thing to my Z radius. Z radius will be 2.5 as well. So as you can see, I created this gigantic widespread circle where all the particles are coming from. You can see that's slightly different than the popcorn look and feel that we had before. And what I'm going to do now is I am going to move the position of my producer on the x-axis all the way up until it's just above the composition. So in my case, it happens to be around -0.8. And now you see the water droplets falling from the sky. Now these look still a bit like snowballs. If you ask me, it's not selling the effect as much as I want it to be looking like droplets of water. And I also noticed that they tend to disappear before they actually hit the ground. If you pay close attention, they will fade. Take a look at this one specifically right here. As I scrub slowly, they disappear, and that is because I haven't given them enough longevity. So I'm going to increase the longevity from 1 second to about, say, 6 seconds. I should see a bit more droplets, number one, and they should all go across the screen seamlessly. The beautiful thing about this particular effect is that it does react like a 3D effect. In other words, if I were to create a camera right now and I were to push it in the Z-axis, I would see that my camera is going right through the droplets. So I can change that particle to anything, just like what we did for the fire, or like what we did for the clouds on this smoke trails exercise. So you can actually change that particle to anything you want. And so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to apply motion blur to that layer, and that should help quite a bit on selling the effect. And now they start to look a bit more like droplets. Now I might want to increase my gravity a little bit. Let me try to do a quick mini render of this, see if the playback is smooth enough. And it's light rain. It's almost like it's droplets falling from a roof. So I want to increase my physics a little bit. I want to increase my gravity from 0.5 to, let's say, 0.8, and see if that gives me faster droplets. And in fact it does. So now when I play this back, droplets look a little bit faster. So you can increase either the speed at which they explode, at which they come out of the producer, or you can increase the gravity to make them fall faster. I prefer using the gravity since I am trying to go for almost a semi-realistic look to my droplets, and that would be the actual true physical way of changing this specific motion graphic effect. So that is what you want. I just increased it to 1, and it looks even a little bit better. So I'll leave it at 1 for now. With that done, I am going to move my copy of my Rainy Eve layer above the rain droplets. And to that one, I am going to apply an effect called Mr. Mercury. CC Mr. Mercury. So if I drop that effect into that layer, you'll notice automatically that it creates this kind of like mercury effect for that particular layer. If I solo that layer, you'll see that basically the layer got melted, almost like liquid metal, and that's what you're seeing. You're seeing a distortion of that particular layer through that effect. This is really good for creating effects like blood or something that is blob-like. It's a great effect for doing such things. So what I'm going to do to this one, instead of just having it be mercury just dropping from the front, I am going to change the settings to actually create the effect of having droplets of water. So what I'm going to do to that is I'm going to increase the radius X to 200, radius Y to 200, and you automatically see that the droplets seem to fall apart, which is great. And notice that they're all moving, like organically moving across the screen. That is really not the way rain moves. This almost looks like bubbles in a shampoo bottle. So what I want to do is I want to make sure they're all falling straight down, and that you notice that as I scrub, the bubbles seem to like increase from nothing to a size, and then they start falling down. That is not the way droplets act when they fall onto glass. They appear suddenly onto the glass, and then they start falling down because they crash against the glass. So what I'm going to do is to create that effect, I'm going to change several settings. The first one is I'm going to change the velocity to 0, so that there's no velocity at which these things are moving when they're coming into the scene. You'll notice that automatically makes them move down, straight down. I am going to change their longevity. You'll notice that they are also at 1 second, which means they disappear magically. As you can see, take a look at this one in the center of the screen almost. It disappears. That's not how droplets act. So I will maintain their longevity for a little longer. Let's say 6 seconds would be sufficient. And you'll notice that that changes the physical appearance of the droplets right away. Then the third thing I'm going to change is I'm going to change the gravity. I'm going to make that gravity 0.25 so that they move down the glass a little slower. You'll notice that they increase as I move downstream. I see a lot more droplets appearing. Next thing I want to do is I want to change the type of the influence map for the blob. Instead of in and out, which is what causes them to look like they're growing when they hit the glass, I want them to appear at a constant size. So from that drop down, I am going to change it. That drop down I'm going to change to constant blobs. You'll notice that they still grow, but it seems like I can go ahead and manipulate now the constant blobs by the blob birth size and death size. So if I go ahead and make that, let's say 2.5, and then the death size 2.5, now they're gonna appear and they're gonna, whoa, that's too big, sorry. I meant to say 0.25. That might look more like droplets. They're not growing, they simply appear as if they were hitting the glass. Let's make them a little bit larger, sorry. Let's make them probably 0.5 each. That might be a bit too big. And there's quite a lot of droplets appearing on the screen. So I might want to reduce the amount of droplets that I'm dealing with. So let's reduce the longevity to about 5 seconds. That's the first thing. The second thing I want to do is I want to change, when those droplets are a bit big. Actually, let's keep them like that for now. And that gives me that impression that there's droplets falling on the window. But if I get too many droplets, the thing starts looking like soap. So I want to reduce that. I still want to reduce that quite a bit. Change the gravity to 0.5. So that it's a little bit more. Actually, let's go back to 0.3, sorry. And let's change the birth rate to about 0.5. So I have less, make it even less, 0.25, and see if that's better. That's much better. So we got good droplets falling across the glass. Now let me see what speed this is, what the speed of this is. What is it looking like? This is real-time playback. That's decent speed for droplets falling across the glass. Now what I don't like about this specific effect right now is, number one, my droplets look really sharp. They look really, really round. So I need to make sure that they get a bit deformed. So they should look more like this. And even more so around the edges. They should look like there's resistance from the glass, which is fractal interference from the actual glass. So I need to create some sort of displacement map for these droplets. And for that, I am going to create a new layer, a new solid, and to that one we're going to apply a displacement map. So I'm going to go Apple Y or Control Y, And this one I'm going to call displacement map. Make it the same size as the comp. Click OK. And then I'm going to apply a displacement map effect to that one. So go to your effects window and search for displacement map. Sorry, let's apply, not displacement map, a fractal noise effect is what we want to apply to this one. So we're going to create the actual map that we're going to use for the displacement map. So using fractal noise, remember we've used it for several things, for texturing, for lava effects, for water effects, for clouds, for smoke. It's a very useful effect, and as I emphasized during class time, get familiar with it. Go ahead and play with it. There's quite a lot of things that you can do with this effect, which will pull you out of a pickle if you need to create fantastic effects for some production. There's quite a lot of things you can do with this, from fire to smoke to water. We're going to change the basic settings of this from basic to cloudy, and I'm going to go from linear to spline. Then I am going to create a couple of keyframes for changing the evolution. I'm going to pull my time marker, let's say, to the 2-second mark. I'm going to set one keyframe for evolution, and then I'm going to press the B key on the keyboard, B as in boy, so that I move my endpoint for my working area to that point. Then I'm going to go down to about 6 seconds, let's say 7 seconds, and I am going to press the End key to bring up my endpoint for my work area, and I'm going to create a new keyframe for evolution with a value of 1 rotation at that point. So if I scrub, you'll see that my texture for my fractal noise is kind of bubbling, and that's all I need for my displacement map. Once I do this, I am going to pre-compose that layer, and to pre-compose that layer, I need to move the effect that I just applied to it inside the layer. The reason for that is because, as you saw in class time, if I were to use the displacement map layer as is today, right now, without pre-composing it, the next effect we're going to be using, which is displacement map, will not be using the information in here because this layer is basically a black layer. That's all it is. It's a black solid. It does not respect the fact that there's fractal noise. It doesn't see the fractal noise as flattened into the layer. So that's the reason why we are pre-composing the layer, so that we can flatten that layer into a sub-layer with the effect, and then the displacement map will look at the entire thing as a black and white image. So I'll just use the name that was given to it, displacement map comp1, and I will move all the attributes into the new composition. You'll notice that I get that layer replaced by the new pre-comp, and the effect disappears, which means it's inside that composition. I can turn its visibility off right now, and then I go back to my rainy eve layer. To this layer, I will apply the displacement map effect. So I'm going to go to my effects and presets window. I am going to look for displacement map, and there it is. I'll apply it to the rainy eve, and let me close my CC Mercury so you can see the displacement map only. You'll notice that that is the displacement map applied to that layer. The displacement map layer will be my displacement map comp1, which is the file that I just created. And I'm going to displace for both the horizontal and the vertical. I'm going to displace the luminance. That's the value that I'm going to be using. And I'm going to increase the value for both from 5 to about, say, 20 for each. You can go a little higher if you need to get more drastic effects. And you'll notice that as soon as I scrub, my water starts to look fractalized. You see that the shape is changing, almost like the water is being as it's sliding down the glass. You find resistance from the actual texture of the glass, which then gives it that true effect. A lot more believable. It's a lot more realistic. So what we're going to do now is, the last thing we're going to do is to sell the effect as I showed you earlier. You'll notice that the background is always it's blurry as compared to what's on focus, which is what's on the glass. And that's the only way you actually can sell that effect a little bit better. So we're going to go back to After Effects, And all I'm going to do is apply a blur effect to my background Eve JPEG layer. So I'm going to go and I'm just going to pick fast blur, which is what we've been using during class. I'm going to apply it to the background layer, and I'm going to increase the blur value to about 12. And you'll notice now that the effect is a little bit more believable. Now you can go ahead and do kind of a trick on this. You can sort of switch it between the background and the foreground to get a more real live effect. So for the first couple of seconds, or 1.5 seconds, I am going to maintain my foreground, my background in focus. So I'm going to go back and change the value of that effect, fast blur, to 0. And I'm going to apply a keyframe at 3.5 seconds. Then I'm going to go to the 4.5 second mark, and I am going to change that blurriness to 12. So you'll notice that when I scrub the video, my first 1.5 seconds, my background is sharp, and then it goes slowly into a blur. I am going to apply the exact same effect to the droplets, which is the rainy Eve image, but I'm going to do it in reverse. So it's going to be blurry to start with, and it's going to go sharp at 4:15. So let me go back to my bottom layer. I'm going to pick the effect that I had just created, fast blur. I'm going to copy it. Then I'm going to go to the droplets, the rainy Eve, this one with the Mr. Mercury, and I am going to paste that effect onto it. Then I'm pressing the U key on the keyboard to reveal the keyframes that I created, and notice that they are the same keyframes that I had created for the previous layer. Only on this layer they're going to play in reverse. So I am going to select both keyframes by clicking on the label or dragging a marker to select both keyframes. Right click, and from the dropout I am going to choose Keyframe Assistant, Time Reverse Keyframes, and that reverses my keyframes. So now you'll notice that my droplets are blurry at the beginning and my background is sharp, and then they crisscross each other so that the droplets become sharp and the background becomes blurry, almost if I was changing my depth of field. And that is basically the effect that we were going for, making this look like a more realistic effect. Well, I hope that you have use for this particular effect, and for all the others that we covered during class last night. Let me know if you guys have any questions.